Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis, the Praise of Folly podcast. This is the second AAR on the second debate in the Lyceum debate series. Tonight I'm joined by Mathoma and Logos. Thanks for joining me tonight. So I guess maybe I'll start with, from what I remember and also what I watched again today, one of the opening, some of the points I think that, and I think Logos would agree with me on this, is that when Mathoma in the debate conceded that science might not be the means by which we could know anything because we couldn't reliably ascertain if what we observe now would be constant with what we observe the next day, that's something that Logos could have really capitalized on in the moment and pointed out, well, then your whole objection against everything falls apart because you can't really be certain of anything. And I also think that Logos was a little too easy on Mathoma when it came to the statistics as well. He made his case in the first opening statement, but then if I remember correctly, it didn't really come up again because I think that was kind of important, like which statistical model you're using. So, do you have any thoughts on that, Matt?
Well, yeah. More importantly, with the statistics thing, the thing I really failed to capitalize on was during the cross-examination. I asked him about science, causality, and abstract concepts such as equality. What does it mean for two things to be equal, to say that X is equal to Y or whatever? And he said, "Well, I don't know if we even have any of that. All we can talk about is observation. We can't observe any of those things." So the place I should have gone with that was, the laws of probability are based on equalities and talking about things being equal in proportion among observations in a sample space or whatnot. But if you've denied all the abstract concepts that build probability, how then can you talk about us taking the most likely outcome if you can't even, epistemologically justify probability in the first place? And that, I think, was a true crime as far as the statistics went. That's going to haunt me for a while.
Well, yeah, Logos, it seems to be the thing, right? If you say something is more or less probable according to what? There has to be some level of surety of knowledge to even compare two things to be more or less probable.
Exactly.
And if the interlocutor just concedes that, then all discussion of probability is meaningless. I will say again, hats off, Mathoma, to being a fedora so well, but you might need to let everybody else know. You might want to come out of the closet that you're not really a fedora right now.
Yeah, believe it or not, I'm not a skeptical new atheist. I'm actually a Catholic, so I don't actually accept Hume's critique of miracles. But it was a good bit of fun though, pretending to not believe in causal relations and necessary connections and abstract ideas. But as you can see, when I lay out that position, it just sounds so ridiculous. I was actually hoping that Matt was a little bit more. He gave me a more thorough lashing on those concepts.
Yeah, I knew you'd be disappointed, man. But I tell you, some of it took me so far off guard. I just didn't even know how to respond to the moment. And I also have a time limit sensitivity thing. I have test anxiety and things like that. And so I'm trying to scramble for how to process what I just heard with the time limit. It's like the compounding stress just kind of got to me, and it was bad. It was bad.
Yeah, that's not so much an argument, but maybe how to learn to be comfortable under some sort of a time limit. What do you think that you would do, knowing what it's like to be under the gun in this particular case, Logos? What would you do in the future to sort of get yourself less anxious about it if you were to be in this role again?
That's a good question. Well, most debate people that actually do this professionally, they actually do actual practice sessions with people where they'll actually set the timer and get used to getting a feel for how long they have to run out their arguments and things like that. And I didn't really practice that beforehand. Don't really have anybody to practice with at home or anything else. So I just kind of winged it, and I just hope that I'm roughly within the time bounds where I run through the thing. And so I think unless I can have that sort of a structured practice thing, I'll have that handicap. Other than that, the best I can do is just do these a lot or watch them a lot and just get used to the flow of time and how it works in these things and just do the best I can.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, as far as the actual debate, like you had told me before, Logos, so when we were preparing for it, there were various arguments you were going to make, and you felt that the way Mathoma had directed the debate, they really weren't all that relevant. Some of the other ones that you hadn't brought up, that you ultimately didn't bring up, I mean to say. I think that part of what, I think part of it is when you were debating Mathoma, it seems like you focused more on what you agreed than what you disagreed. So in the cross examination, it felt more like a conversation than a debate. I feel like maybe if you'd have focused more on what you actually disagreed in the cross examination, rather than talking about what you agreed on, it would have been more fruitful for your side.
It's true. And the real question was, what exactly do I disagree on, especially in the cross-examination? So, when Mathoma says, "Oh, well, we'll just take things as true on a basis of what we most likely believe to be true," it's like, well, on a basic perspective, what's wrong with that? I mean, we run through life and we make all sorts of little calculations in our head all the time about what we think is true about something or another, and we make our best guess and we run with it. Very, very few people say, "Hey, you know what? This thing is most likely to be absolute bollocks, and so I'm going to jump right in." And so there's a part of that most people intuitively say, "Oh yeah, that sounds great." And so trying to tease out the part of that that's absurd, which boils down to the epistemological brass tacks, the part that I didn't think about in the moment, that's the part that I disagreed on. And I was trying to tease it out in the question. There's a point where I was trying to formulate a question in the cross-examination. And I sat there for like 30 seconds trying to think of it. And I even told you that I was trying to think of it. I couldn't articulate what I wanted to say, and it turned out to be the probability thing I brought up. I thought of it like 3 minutes after the debate. I'm just like, oh, come on. Okay, so yeah, that's the problem. It's trying to tease out where we disagree from when we agree, because most everymen agree on the basics of how we deal with like basic truth value. It's trying to develop an entire epistemology around such a layman's interpretation of the truth value. That's where things get screwed up.
Yeah, because the cross-examination, I felt like you actually agreed with Mathoma, which looks bad from your position since you're arguing against Mathoma's case. I think that from Mathoma's performance, again, I think it was very well. He did very well. I think you got a little lucky there, Mathoma, where Logos didn't call you out on the probability stuff. But I think the one thing, though, that it was a weak part, though, of your account, though, was in your rebuttal to Logos. You said that, you sort of dodged, and I guess you were able to make the dodge, but you sort of dodged the differing kinds of probabilities, different models of probability that you could use to say this is more or less probable. Because I think that was the first thing Logos brought up in his statement. And I suppose it was a successful dodge because he didn't really bring it up again. Because I do think, though, that what's more or less probable does depend on the factors that you put into the equation. And I feel like that you got lucky there too. That if somebody had seen that, they could have said, "Hey, well, no, that's so easy. That's so easy, Mathoma. You gotta come back to this." So,
Yeah.
like again, you did very well, but I think in a couple of places though, you also got a little lucky. So, what do you think about that, Mathoma?
Yeah, actually, I'm not so sure I dodged it. I think it was more that I didn't really understand what Logos was getting at with his probability objection. I suspected I did, but I didn't want to I don't know, straw man him. So that was I think my first question in the Q&A was asking him what he was getting at, because I suspected what he was getting at was the distinction between frequentist and Bayesian models of probability. But I didn't want to bring that up immediately in my rebuttal because I didn't want to straw man his position, because I suspected he was saying that maybe if you use a Bayesian framework, that some of the the core argument I was propounding might be suspect.
Yes. Oh, speaking of another thing where I think you got really lucky, Mathoma, was when you were talking about the reliability of witnesses, and you even admitted what you were saying was kind of an ad hominem. Matt should have called you out on that, and that would have just been like an instant point for Matt. And he kind of didn't call you out on that. So if somebody was more quicker on their feet, they would have said, "Whoa, Mathoma, you just admitted to using a logical fallacy. Tut tut." And that could have been some easy points for them.
Was that I forget like where exactly that was. Was that my closing statement? I do remember conceding that. I think I was just trying to be funny that I was actually using an ad hominem argument there.
No, yeah.
Was that in the closing or?
I don't think it was closing. I think it was in the I think it was in the cross-examination when Logos was cross-examining you. You said that when you're talking about who we should trust eyewitness-wise, and you said this might sound like an ad hominem, but it really isn't. And I think whether or not that was an ad hominem could have been something they could have sort of pinned you on, and you would have then been on the defensive trying to argue, well, I wasn't really making an ad hominem, but that could have. I think another thing that was possibly a little weaker on your side was I know you're trying to be a little bit of panache and pizzazz to it, but I think some of your statements were off topic, not overtly off topic in a big way, but someone could have called you on that and just said, because I think what happened Logos was Thomo was weaving a web, and he wanted you to get tangled up in the web and kind of avoid the key point. And I think part of your frustration, Logos, when you were trying to think on your feet to get to the probability point, is you got tangled up in the web what Thomo was weaving. What do you think?
That could be. I mean, as far as the ad hominem part with the witness thing, I don't think I would have called them out on that, because an ad hominem, as I understand it, is you attack a person's character to avoid addressing their argument. But as far as witness testimony goes, the point is we distinguish between witnesses all the time. You have to get a witness okay to testify, and regularly we won't let people testify for crimes if they were on drugs at the time, or if they may have a conflict of interest, or there's some circumstances or whatever. And so, I mean, ad hominems are good for like academic arguments, but in the discussion of testimony and just gut believability and that sort of thing, it's not exactly clear what I exactly could have pinned him on there. So I just refrained from doing it. As far as the getting tangled in the web part, I mean, it's true, because like you said, you said I wasn't calling him out on where we disagreed. Well, that's exactly what I was trying to figure out, is where we disagreed. Because notice that I was prepared in the debate to look at first the argument that, are miracles even possible, right? Because Hume has the argument that they're deductively impossible. Well, I didn't have to argue that. Okay, well, am I going to look at, miracles are necessarily improbable? Like, that's a property of them, is that low frequency events are improbable therefore. Well, no, I really didn't have to look at that too much either. We went right to the meat of, okay, let's just look at what's more believable. It's kind of like a layman's discussion. It felt like two laymen talking about this cool event they saw at the supermarket the other day. It's just like, okay, that's not like a really concrete position to really argue on as two sides. And so I felt like half the battle I had was just figuring out exactly, it's like, okay, what would the audience agree with? What would the audience disagree with? Where can I find issue to really disagree with here? Because I felt like most of my argument had been conceded to me already just in the opening statement. And so I was trying to figure out where I can disagree and also seem reasonable to the audience.
Yeah, I think in one case, now I know you prepared to argue, are miracles possible? Are miracle, and all those things that you had mentioned. Since Mathoma was defending the Humean construction, I don't think it would have been out of place to bring those up. The way you might have attempted to do that is by saying that the position that you should maybe reminding Mathoma, you're supposed to be defending the Humean position, and then sort of get him to admit that yes, these are the Humean positions on the issue. And then you could say, well, if you don't actually agree with Hume on this, and you agree with me, therefore, if you agree with me, then you should be on my side of the debate. That's one possible way you could have worked those in.
I could have, yeah. I just didn't even think about it, because in an actual debate, it just seemed like if he opened the floor with basically conceding the points, bringing up the points to again try to beat him up with them after he already conceded them might seem to the audience to be kind of like a jerk move. And so I'm like, I have to consider arguments versus optics, because you do ultimately want to get the audience to change their mind. And so I just left it alone.
Yeah, so I think basically, I think we're all in agreement. The actual disagreement of that debate was the probability of such things. And I think we're all in agreement too that if Logos had made that connection sooner, he could have been more fruitful in the use of his cross-examination.
Exactly.
So I guess Mathoma, what are your thoughts on your own performance, on Logos's performance?
Well, well, seeing as how I don't really agree with my own position, I'm just trying to parrot the Humean construction. I thought, just listening to the debate again, 90% of my opening statement was pure shtick. There were maybe two core arguments within it. There was that argument from the relative probabilities and another quasi argument from why these miracles always occur in the past and why we don't see miracles more recently. So I think a lot of my performance was just pure shtick, and I was running off of that. Like I said, I'm just using the humane construction. I made it seem a little preposterous because I had to deny causality and all that. And I think, as we were talking before, I think that was just a really weak part of my own, well, and Hume's position too, and that could have been capitalized on.
Exactly, the denial of causality. That's another thing. I think you might have mentioned that actually after the debate, Logos, you missed that opportunity.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I got him to basically agree during the cross-examination that, well, because things aren't necessarily caused by physical laws, we don't even have the concept of replicability in science, and therefore the entire idea of pinning down, what causes what or what two things are linked together. He basically admitted that that might not even be true in the cross-examination. But he spent the entire debate talking to the good men and women of science. And I just didn't put two and two together to be like, aha, but you've just undermined their entire profession. What's wrong with you? I don't have that killer instinct yet. And so I'm always just kicking myself, being like, man, that would have been so cool if I said that.
Oh yeah, well, don't feel too bad, Logos, because I remember when I first started doing these kinds of things at college, every time I have an argument with a professor or a fellow student, I would mull it over in my mind, like what I could have or should have said in the moment. And there'd be times that I'm like, oh, that was so obvious. Why didn't I say that? But, I did it enough at college where I eventually learned, to learn how to think on my feet quickly enough to capitalize on something that they said and develop that killer instinct. So, again, I think part of it is practice. A big part of it is practice. And that's, of course, what these debates are for, is to develop skills and practice to do this better. Now, it is true. I would also admit that it seems that maybe Mathoma, because you felt that you had the more advantageous position by about the midway point, you didn't have to. But it also seemed that since you had got Logos to agree with you on a great many points, you could have been a little more aggressive and called him out and said, hey, you agree with me so much. What are we even debating about?
Yeah, I guess I could have done that. Even though I was kind of satisfied with with my closing statement, because I don't think, because in the debate format too, I think Logos didn't spend any of his time in his own rebuttal, and his closing statement was rather short too. So there are a number of things I was able to kind of slip in at the last moment, and it looked like he wasn't able to rebut these. Well,
yeah, exactly. Because in the last you had the final closing statement, right, Mathoma? Right. So you were able to throw out some FUD that Logos couldn't deal with, and that was the last thing that people heard. Yeah. I think as far as moderator though, how I did, how would you guys rate my role as a moderator?
Fine, you're always professional. You just keep track of the time. That's pretty nice.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that I could point out as a misstep is I didn't realize that, Mathoma, you were just about to end after your opening statement, so I was a little abrupt, because I could have given you a couple more seconds to finish your statement. Because I didn't know
that was fine.
I didn't know if you were going to keep on going, and I was just trying to keep it on the timetable. But I realized that you were winding down. I'm like, that looks kind of bad optically, but I didn't do it again. And but again, some people are long-winded. Like when you Mathoma debated Snake is Ninja, you both could get rather long-winded, especially in the cross-examination. And I really did have to lay my foot down to end it. But so I was still operating off that mentality. Whereas you and Logos are a bit more genteel, more laid back. Because you you and the Snake Ninja were really going at it, Mathoma. You were really being aggressive, which was definitely entertaining. I'll admit that. But I think we've pretty much covered all the bases. Is there anything else you guys could think of adding to the performances of each other?
Not really. I think we got it.
Actually, there was one point I was curious in examining, particularly how Logos was trying to formulate. I think Logos was trying to make another argument that belief in miracles was justified just in terms of like some pragmatic reason that there might be some situations in which we don't get to examine all of the contingencies surrounding the miracle, and the miracle might be like really high stakes or something. So you might be able to make some sort of pragmatic justification. But I guess one critique I would have the way Logos formulated that he kind of allowed me to say that stupid remark that I made that, oh, you're not interested in the truth, you're just interested in your feels. But I think there was actually like a really interesting counter argument there, that there might be some pragmatic justifications in some situations for believing in miracles.
That's a good point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because now I have another question. So let me ask you this. Hypothetically, Logos, if you had been in Mathoma's shoes, how would you have done it? Would you have done it similar to Mathoma or different?
Done the argument?
Yeah, if you had instead been in Mathoma's shoes in the debate, how would you have done it? Would you have done it differently, similarly?
No, I think he prepared better than I expected him to prepare for. I think he had a sense that the other Humean arguments were a bit less defensible than the one he stuck with, and the one he stuck with is the more gut one that the scientists and the lay people and people really think about on a day-to-day basis. And it's also the one that it's harder for me to take a position against without seeming unreasonable. And so by really going down that route, again, it made it really, really hard to differentiate myself while not falling into his traps, basically, about, unreasonableness and things like that.
Yeah, so I guess, Mathoma, if you had been in Logos' shoes and you had to attack the Humean construction of miracles, what would you have done differently, similar, or how would you have taken that on?
Well, I would have definitely pressed that point about my own refutation of causality undermining science, because in my opening statement shtick, I was kind of spinning the whole narrative that people in the past were quite stupid, and eventually science comes along and tells us all how the world works. So I'm kind of using the authority of science just to build up my own position. But then I go right ahead and reject causality, and that undermines the whole narrative to begin with. So I think we mentioned this already, but I would have been more forceful about that. Just that observation that my own denial of causality would undermine the very authority that we're all giving to science.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, that's a common statement that skeptics make, and it's really easy to pick them out on. But yeah, I think we've covered all the relevant bases. Thanks for joining the AAR, Mathoma. Thanks, Logos. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.